COP26 was an opportunity again for world leaders to come together and renew their commitments towards addressing the impacts of climate change. And this required for everybody concerned, particularly heads of state, to be there. For Zimbabwe, it now becomes, a significant moment where, given the impacts of climate change that we have seen through events such as Cyclone Idai, the prolonged droughts and long winters, it became important for Zimbabwe to also be part of that process and mechanism to say how then can we understand and embrace the climate change mechanisms that should be in place at a global level, a national level, and also at local level. So this was a significant moment for Zimbabwe to be part of the COP26 this time around, where it's one of the last opportunities for us to save the impact of climate change that is affecting our communities today.
I think it is important for us to understand that COP26 actually came at a moment whereby countries were submitting their NDCs, which are referred to as the nationally determined contributions. The nationally determined contributions are basically commitments which member countries that are signatory to the Paris Agreement to show that how committed they are as countries in reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. The Paris Agreement basically operates on a bottom-up approach whereby countries can set up their own targets which they think they are achievable by a certain period. It could be 2030, 2035, or 2050. So this was the main significance of the Conference of the Parties 26, and also realizing that the Conference of the Parties 26 could not take place in 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So this was quite a huge moment for most people, because there were a lot of pending issues from COP25 in Madrid which needed to be treated with urgency.
Yeah, the United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26, that was held in 2021 in Glasgow, it's very significant to countries like Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe, it's a developing country. It's one of the poorest countries in the world, which means it's very vulnerable to the effects of the climate crisis. Our economy is already in shambles. Our social systems are not really working. So if we are to add the problems that come from climate change, be it drought, be it flooding that we have seen in Land, we can actually say that we don't have the resources to deal with the impacts of climate change. So conferences such as COP26 are very significant in order to get the voices from the global south, in order to get the voices from the representatives as well as practitioners operating in the global south who come face to face with the impacts of climate change.
Zimbabwe has the climate change policy, it has the climate change strategy, and there is a climate change bill that is there. In order for us to brag about the projects that we have on the ground, we need to have good policies, and these policies should be inclusive and accommodative of each and every group: young people, the business community, the NGO sector, the private sector. All these people should be part of it, including the indigenous community. If these documents or these policies are compiled in a more inclusive manner, it also becomes easy for projects to be implemented on the ground, because it's either people are aware of what is going on, and people normally love contributing to, people love participating in something that they have contributed to. So this is where we are. I can say that we have the policies that support us to come up with good implementation, good projects on the ground. Could it be mitigation? Could it be adaptation? But policies on their own, they are not enough. For us to come up with robust climate-related projects on adaptation, to make sure that our communities are safe, to make sure that our communities are well nourished, there is need for financial capacity, there is need for technical capacity. If we are talking about agroecological practices, if we are talking about climate smart agriculture, then we need to be equipped. We need the resources to make sure that we'll be able to implement climate smart related practices in those specific communities.
Countries like Zimbabwe, in terms of theory, they do have plans to tackle climate change. Zimbabwe, through the Climate Change Management Department and through civil society, they've developed what are called NDCs, or nationally determined contribution reports, that they are supposed to submit in terms of the UNFCCC and the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. So they've done that. And they've made promises to reduce, greenhouse gas emissions by 33% initially, and then they expanded that to 40%. So we aim to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 40% per capita, that is per person. And so those actions are there, but the implementation of those actions is the tricky part, because we need political will, we also need financial, there's need for financial support to both the government, to civil society, and to the vulnerable populations themselves.
The country has been able to put in place policies and mechanisms to be able to address the impacts of climate change. This includes mechanisms such as the Environmental Management Act, as well as the Environmental Management Agency, the Climate Change Department, as well as the ministry, the parent ministry. But this cannot be adequate enough to address the impacts of climate change that are affecting our societies today. We also need financing. So I would say that as much as we have mechanisms and institutions to address the impacts of climate change, it's not adequate. We still need to put more. We need to invest more in climate change mitigation and adaptation by financing those processes, by educating and engaging communities, by ensuring that we mainstream climate change programming within all the economic activities that happen within our country. So my submission is that we are not yet prepared to address the impacts of climate change, because some other sectors of the economy have not embraced the climate change agenda. So we need to be able to put in place and be able to push as a nation for the climate change agenda to be mainstreamed across the economic and social activities of this nation. Then we can now start saying that we are now on the right path to addressing climate change.
We, as the developing countries, Zimbabwe included, it is very difficult for us to say we are capable to adapt to the effects of climate change if we do not have the resources. The developed countries, they pledged to give 100 billion to developing countries annually, and the previous COP highlighted that this was a failure. The developed countries failed to commit to this commitment, and this also derails progress when it comes to the development of Africa. We cannot start talking about how we are going to compensate people who have been affected by the effects of climate change if we do not even have the resources to do so, if we have not yet set aside a finance mechanism to do so. So this is what made the negotiations a bit tricky, and the developed countries now committed to give 500 billion within a period of 2021 to 2025. If this is going to be achieved, we're still yet to see. But for now, progress has been delayed because we do not have the resources, including not only Zimbabwe, but most developing countries, to make sure that they can adapt, they can mitigate to the effects of climate change. This is where the whole issue is about. Over the past...
First and foremost, these industrialized economies or the developed world, they are the ones who have contributed much of the global warming. They've contributed much to climate change because their development throughout the history have been through industry, through much use of fossil fuels. So those countries, they've got a responsibility. It used to be just a moral responsibility to assist the poor countries, but now they have a legal obligation in terms of the Paris Agreement. They are supposed to provide climate financing to developing countries such as Zimbabwe and other countries in the world. It's
common knowledge that developed countries contribute largely to the impact of climate change through carbon emissions and economic activities that contribute to climate change. That's why we have such things such as the polluter pays principle, pays principle, and so forth. And the role of these nations then is to finance So this is one of the key commitments, apart from the, from the commitment to, increase, afforestation. The major commitments that should come out of the COP26 this time around is for us to increase financing. And I feel that is where developed nations need to come in. Without adequate financing, it will be very difficult for us to, to fully implement climate adaptation and mitigation activities or interventions. All these things need financing. So that is where the developed countries need to come in to say, from the $100 billion, fund that was set up from the Paris Agreement, that commitment has to be fulfilled. And developed countries have to play that part. Secondly, I feel that developed countries also need to share technology. So technology such as, solar energy innovation, even wind energy, innovations, which the developed nations have been able to master and effectively design. These things need to be shared to developing nations so that there's a holistic approach towards addressing climate change. Thirdly, I think there needs to be policy reforms within developed nations where they also need to embrace the green agenda, the green energy agenda, so that they can also start reducing their carbon emissions. So I feel those are the three major things that developed nations need to come in so that we can address the impacts of climate change.
It has been very difficult to get to agree on certain terms on how developing countries are going to be supported by developed countries. It has been difficult to also agree on carbon markets because at the end, developing countries were saying, you cannot pay us for you to continue to emit a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So this has been quite complicated. Now with COP27 happening in Africa, whereby African countries, most of African countries rely on agriculture, we also expect that, there are a lot of issues and a lot of noise that will happen when it comes to making sure that we climate-proof our agriculture. We make sure that we come up with certain innovations so that our agriculture can sustain its people, its African people. So in short, I think this is my analysis on COP26. Basically, as a young person looking forward to COP27 and how young people from Zimbabwe, how young people from Africa will play a meaningful role in terms of policy contribution and in terms of implementing real projects on the ground. Because as we are doing these negotiations, already people are already dying in the affected communities due to the effects of climate change. Crops are failing to sprout because of the effects of climate change. So we need to make sure that what we negotiate on the table speaks directly to something that is happening on the ground.
The major problem that faces us as practitioners and environmentalists from the global south, there's lack of commitment by global north countries. Those countries that contributed to climate change are also failing to provide climate financing. There have been lots of years, since the Paris Agreement, they have not really met up their climate financing until I think last year. But all those years in between, all those 5 years where they were supposed to provide up to at least $100 billion per year, they haven't managed to meet that financial commitment. So that's one of the major problems. So we really need to ensure that the global north countries meet their commitments. Also need to make sure that they correct their politics, because at one end we have like the Trump administration actually pulling out of the Paris Agreement. So those issues pose very serious challenges for us as environmental activists in the global south, and we need the global north to meet their commitments.
The lack of real commitments by developed nations during all COP summits has been a sticking point, and we now need to move away from that. It becomes an issue of failing to address the impacts of climate change when developed nations fail to live up to those commitments. So I mentioned the issue of the $100 billion fund that is laid out in the Paris Agreement to say it should be there so that nations can tap from that fund to address climate change, and developed nations need to contribute to that. But the failure by these nations to make a real commitment makes it a no-show. You know, so we've got a no-show, we've got a summit which is not tangible results, and when we come back to our respective countries, then we've got nothing to pursue because our counterparts are failing to make a real commitment. I would say that, you know, developing nations, particularly, you know, countries in the global south, they've been able to make so many strides towards addressing the impact of climate change, you know, by introducing, you know, such things such as smart agriculture and renewable energy. But our counterparts in the global south, have not been able to do so. So that has to change so that we can meaningfully say that we've been able to, you know, live up to the expectations of the COP summits.
Good afternoon and welcome back to another episode of Planet B. I'm your host, STABILE LUNGA. Now today's conversation maneuvers around young women's voices on the build-up to COP27. What are the key issues that need redressing in Zimbabwe's context? Joining me in this conversation are very phenomenal young panelists who I'm going to ask to introduce themselves. Welcome to the program, ladies.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe starting with you, then you and you.
Okay, my name is NESIA MHAKA. I'm a communications officer with SAPPHIRE. SAPPHIRE is Southern Alliance for Indigenous Resources. It's an NGO which mainly focuses on natural resource management for sustainable livelihoods development.
Thank you so much. Can I call you Nessie?
Yes, it's okay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Welcome to the program, Nessie.
Thank you.
Introduce yourself, ma'am.
Okay, my name is NATALIE GWATIRISA and I'm a climate activist and also a founder of All for Climate Action, which is an organization that is basically focusing on raising awareness on climate change issues for active participation of young people.
Thank you so much, Natalie, and welcome to Planet B.
Thank you.
Right, introduce yourself, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Lumbizai Chiemba. I'm a climate activist working with IXM, which is African Youth Initiative on Climate Change, and I'm also a Safety, Health and Environment Officer with Tutanga Energy, which is an independent power producer dealing in renewable energy.
All right, thank you so much, ladies, and welcome. Okay, so we're talking about our road to COP27. It's not all of our audience that knows what COP27 is, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm going to start with you, Rumbi. Tell us, what exactly do you understand by COP27?
COP27, in my own understanding, it is the 27th session of the Conference of Parties, where now we are taking a radical turn to focus on Africa. What should we do to focus on Africa? Since after all, Africa is the most hit by climate change, so now let's focus on Africa.
Thank you so much for that, Rumbi. I think our audience understands. All right, so we're talking about women and climate change. Is there a link there? Maybe I'm gonna come to you, Natalie, as a young woman in Zimbabwe. What are the effects that climate has on young women?
Okay, so climate change is really affecting women. You look at women being, they are the ones who, anzi mushamukadzi. So they are the ones who cook, they look for water, they look for firewood. How is now climate change affecting them? So you look at the women who are in the rural areas. They look for firewood, they look for water, they look for, they use the fossil fuels, talk about the trees, the firewood, the charcoal. So you find that they even walk long distances to fetch water. So you can imagine if they are to be affected by climate change, of which they are already. So now they're walking long distances and now there is increase in insecurity. How secure are they in those places? They walk long distances and there are higher risks that they can be sexually abused there. There's domestic violence, there are quite a lot of things that are happening. So yeah, climate change is really happening. It's
all right, thank you so much for that point, Natalie. Maybe coming to you, Nessie. I said I'll call you Nessie now. Yeah, maybe tell us what you think is going on, you know, between the link between women and climate change. I mean, she spoke about how women have to walk long distances to look for water, and if our seasons are changing, sometimes the rains are not even coming and they can't have access to water. Tell us about, you know, what you think could be done. What can be done better in terms of the link between women and climate change?
Okay, in terms of firewood, my colleague said women are walking long distances. I think we need to put mitigator measures such as the cook stoves.
Right.
Yes, because when you're using cook stoves, you use lesser firewood than when you're using our ordinary 3-stone stove.
Okay.
So I think, and maybe drilling of solar-powered bores in those communities.
Okay, hold
so
that thought right there, Nessie. Okay. Coming back to you, Rumbi, you've been quiet throughout this discussion. Maybe tell us, you know, we are trying so much. COP26 has a goal of reducing, you know, global warming degrees by 1.5 degrees, right? And for me, personally, that's impractical because in Zimbabwe already, we have women who are in the rural areas, like she said, who are using firewood, which emits smoke, which goes back to the ozone layer and destroys it. Is it practical? Are we going to get to that goal where we want 1.5 degrees reduced?
Okay, just going back to what NATALIE was saying, my heart lies with the marginalized. Of course, marginalized are the most hardest hit by the climate change. And of course, them being the hardest hit, why? Because they have to rely on their livelihoods, on the environment. Thus, they have to use firewood, they have to get water, and then now we're facing the problem of water scarcity. So it really does come back to them. And then they're still emitting, but then what do you want them to do? They don't have another source of energy. So I think for us to attain that agenda of 1.5 degrees, the government, us as youths, us as everyone, it is our duty to take climate action now and make sure that we do something to educate them so that they're able to adapt to climate change.
And
so that they can
I think before you even talk about the government, the policies, I think women themselves can be like the champions for climate action.
Right.
You find that, let's talk about the clean energy. They're using firewood as their source of energy. Let's talk of the total stuff. So if you teach a woman, if you educate her that if you are to use an open fire, you're likely to use quite a lot of firewood. You're likely to emit a lot of carbon in the atmosphere. Why not shift to use total stuff? Because they're energy efficient. So instead of cutting down those trees, they're now using total. So they're just using the twigs. They're no longer like cutting down the whole tree. So you now see that they're also trying to protect and to preserve.
Exactly.
That's my
question. Do they have the capacity?
Now that's where the government have to come in, and the civic societies. We need to come together. Let's educate women about that, because right now, if I was in Chipinge recently and I met this guy who was trying to. He have got an energy company, solar energy company, and I had to ask him, like, what other projects have you done so far in the Tongogara refugee camp? But now he said that he's trying to donate. He's working on a project to donate solar lights and, you know, the solar panels to every household. How many people are living in the refuge camp, and do you have the capacity to give them? So now you're looking at, okay, what do they have? What do the people have already? Why not utilize it? Why not look at, they're using firewood, like I said, why not try to use something that is energy efficient?
Even though the time that the Green Climate Fund should chip in, after all, the developed countries did promise us.
But at the same time, we have to do something with what we have already. We have to do something with what we have.
I feel like Nessie wants to say something.
Yes, I think to add on education, right? We need to see how best can we link our technical and their indigenous knowledge systems, and see how best can we collaborate. I think we can come up with a.
Okay, ladies, I understand that Zimbabwe lacks a feminist aspect of, you know, framing climate change as a gender justice, right? I want to know, maybe I'm going to ask this to you, Rumbi, how are you as a young woman making a difference in terms of, you know, issues to do with climate change? Because already we spoke about education, but are we really educating the people? We in the towns are educated, but there's someone who doesn't know anything about climate change. They don't know if they're cutting a tree, they're causing some imbalances in the atmosphere. What are you doing as a young woman, or even as the organizations that you're representing today?
As a young woman working with a company that's dealing with renewable energy, we are installing solar power. We've got a solar power plant that we've recently installed in St. Patrick's, where it's going to be offering services for the school, which is a boarding school, and then also for a hospital, which now means that women no longer have to walk long distances to be able to access health services.
Right.
All thanks to that solar power plant. So I believe that I'm making an impact.
All right. And Natalie, I hear that you're the founder of some organization. Maybe tell us, how's that organization making a difference in terms of climate change? Because obviously you're in the climate change and you're a climate activist. You're in that field.
All right, thank you. Okay, so with my organization, we are a year old. We're turning a year old in May.
Right.
So for now, I think recently I was in Chipinge and we managed to launch the Sports for Climate Action.
Right.
The whole idea was also to focus on women. We were celebrating Women's Month recently, so we tried to focus more on women. And the reason why we chose sports is because, you know, it's just good to have entertainment sometimes.
Exactly.
So you have to take advantage of that. We had to take advantage of the gathering that we had and talk to them. So at least we started with a workshop where we educated them, and then we had 3 games. 3 games. That's volleyball. We had volleyball, basketball, and then soccer. So all these were played by women, and we're actually empowering them and teaching them about climate change. So we really haven't done much, but as a young activist, as a young woman, I'm using my I'm using my voice right now. I'm talking.
You're using your voice.
Exactly.
And we're talking about women's voices in terms, you know, of climate change and the road to COP27. So shout out to you for that.
Thank you.
Just the time
Exactly. You know. Okay,
Thank
Nessie, maybe tell us what exactly is your organization doing in terms of the issue of climate change and the road to COP27.
Okay, thank you. As Sapphire, we are doing a quite number of initiatives. I think we can start with the non-timber forest products. We are doing Madora or Matimbi. So we are doing it in Bedbridge and Gwanda, and in some parts of Chireti or in Malepati, Majinji.
Right.
So, you know, those areas, they are mainly for cattle, and the rainfall there is very low. So they just they harvest their Madora and sell it. And for that, we are trying to make sure that our forestry are protected. Because if you tell them that if you protect this forestry, you will get Madora, and you sell them and you get money. So they will take care of.
That's quite
They take care of
the
that.
fact that you're putting an entrepreneurship, you know, kind of link to it,
Yeah.
and it also brings awareness to women in terms of working for themselves.
Yes,
so
yes.
shout out to your organization as well, Nessie.
Thank you.
security as
Food
well.
security as
I
well.
was getting
Yes.
to that.
Yeah, talk
We are
about
doing
jobs.
Like
Exactly.
in areas like Mbire and Musarabani, we are doing the marula oil, Masau gem, so that they can they process it, and then we give them machines to pump oil from marula, from what do you call it, baobab seed, and they'll sell it. So it's about this bottle, $10. So for a rural woman, it's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money,
Yeah.
and I
That's
like
what we
that.
are doing.
Okay, so we're talking about what they're supposed to do. You say the government is supposed to do something, but as a young woman, you're a young woman and you see what's going on in Zimbabwe. I mean, you're here wearing your nice jackets and your heels, ladies, looking lovely. But there's a woman, and you know what they're facing because you guys are in the field as well, right? Tell us, what do you think the government should do? Are there any policies in your head right now? Maybe they're watching, you know, Planet B today. Let's put that, you know, initiative by Natalie, or, you know, on to look at it. So maybe tell us, what do you think the government should do? Are there policies they're supposed to put out there?
All right, so I think that there should be an environment. They should open an environment that women are freely able to participate on issues to do with climate change. So you find that I'm here in Harare. Yes, I can go to Chipinge. Yes, I can go to Chimani, but the woman who is actually being affected most is someone who's actually there, who's on ground. So yes, I can speak on your behalf, but they also need to be involved in this.
Exactly.
So you also look at the geospatial, like they have to consider who is who and where is that person.
Right.
So if you are to take a woman from Mani and a woman from Harare, we're totally different. If I'm to summarize to you how flooding means to me, it's different from here. So I think it's important to take that person and she speaks on her own, because there is nothing for the people without the people. They have better ideas, better, you know, it's quite different.
They experience more,
Exactly.
you know, they know what they're going
And then
through.
the other issue now is on the research data. We need data. Right now, if you were to ask how many women were really affected by Cyclone Idai, we don't know. How many women lost their lives there, we don't know. How many women gave birth during that time?
Right.
We don't have that data, so we need that. We need educational institutions. They have to go out there and do those researches. We need that data. At least if we are we need those statistics. You know, things sometimes we can talk about it, but numbers can tell.
Right.
The details can tell. So we need those. We need the evidence.
Thank you so much for that, Natalie.
Yeah.
I like the fact that you mentioned Cyclone Idai. We know that it affected lots of people in the Eastern Highlands, yes. Let's try to understand something. I'm still on the policies, and this question goes to you, Rumbi. Women obviously are, I was looking at some statistics by the UN, and it shows that 80% of women, of people are actually women that are displaced due to these natural disasters. And the question is, are they being protected, especially in Zimbabwe? Let's look at the Cyclone Idai issue. There are things like sanitary. Women are suffering in terms of that. There's period poverty. There's so much that affects, you know, young women, even the older women in our society. What can the government do better in terms of, if we are to face another cyclone in Zimbabwe, what can they do better that they didn't do during, you know, Cyclone Idai?
What the government didn't do during Cyclone Idai, they knew that it was coming.
Exactly.
And then they didn't put any measures.
Prepared.
Yes, preparedness.
Exactly.
Even
I agree with
information, they didn't have information. They didn't know that cyclone is coming.
Right.
Yes.
So how then do we deal with issues like this? Because we have to be prepared. And looking at it, the men are okay. They're not okay, but it affects women more because they are the ones that are displaced. They are the ones that face, you know, you said imba mukadzi, they have to find food for the children and the family. We talk about things like sanitary way. It's not there, what can be done better in terms of preparedness when it comes to do with issues to do with, you know, climate and protecting women?
Okay, so I always say that there is no climate action without climate literacy.
Right.
Education is power. Educate a woman and educate the whole world.
Right.
So now look at, if I am to teach you about, if the government would have informed me that Cyclone Idai is coming, I would have prepared more. I would have moved maybe from one place to another.
Right.
So I think empowering women, I like the fact that look at people like Greta Thunberg. She's young, she's a woman, but she's doing it. She's making trends out there. Women can. So I think if we empower women more on climate, if we do more of climate empowerment, I think we can.
I agree with you, Natalie.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, women are everything. Give a woman a house, she
Exactly.
makes it a home.
Exactly.
Give a woman
Okay, we're
that
fighting for
climate.
gender equality. Not trying to put women
No, we
above
need
men.
more
I think
women.
no,
You know,
no,
it's
no.
about equality.
Yeah.
We are all important at the
Yes,
end
we
of
are
the
all
day.
important,
Yeah.
but then I'm just saying, I'm just bringing it home.
Okay.
That if we empower the woman,
Right.
if we give her that knowledge, the climate education that she needs, then she's going to think of ways of how to adapt, how to mitigate.
And educate her
Yes.
children as
Besides,
well.
Exactly.
She should educate generations and generations.
She is
to
the
come.
one who runs the
But
house.
Right.
on education,
Right.
you know, a lot of women in communities, in marginalized communities,
Right.
they don't know about climate change.
They don't.
Exactly.
They don't know. I remember in Bire, they were like, we are using these cook stoves, but now because asking them about climate change, they don't
They
know.
don't
They
know.
literally
That's a
don't know.
gap right
And I
there.
think that's a
Exactly.
very big
Right.
gap.
And COP27 is, you know, focusing. It's actually in Egypt, in Africa, meaning that there's something wrong with our heat and everything. But these people still don't know about, you know,
About
climate
climate
change. What do we do? Where do we go from here? How do they become educated? I understand, Nessie, you've been in the media industry. what's the media doing about educating people about climate change? And do you think that it's reaching those in the marginal areas? Not only to newspaper and they don't know anything about it, you know?
You know, like in media, what I noticed is they are doing it for commercial purposes.
Right.
It's for business.
And not for educating.
Not for educating.
Right.
It's for business.
It could
so
be educational, but it's for
it will not make sense for Herald to put their newspaper in Bire or in Zarabani.
Okay.
They will not buy those newspapers. So they will just circulate here. They distribute it here in towns where they can get money. I come from Musha, Kupoera. We got the Anima newspaper usually when you're going for holidays, like on Easter, like now. And they will be expired. And they will not read.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think in media we need to disseminate information, and even the newspapers everywhere, so that everyone can read and understand.
We are speaking about education, educating the women, the marginalized, but then what's the point when you're just educating them here in Zimbabwe, wherever they are, in Nimbuzia or what's not? Why don't we let them, let's give them the platform, why don't we let them participate in the conference of the parties?
Exactly.
When take a look at COP26, how many women under the Zimbabwean delegation were there?
Is there anyone that was at COP26?
Yeah.
Not me.
No,
but someone was.
From this article that I actually read, it said that 16% of women were there in the COP26 core team. Right. So there's a huge gap.
There's
16,
a gap. Exactly.
16 it's a little. So I also feel like she said, take those women from rural areas. Why don't they represent us? Because they are the people who are actually being affected by it. They know best. I don't know anything. I don't know much. Yes, I can talk about climate change, but she knows best. She knows, she have got great experience of that. Right. So, and also looking at who is communicating the message on climate change in the rural areas? How is the message being contextualized? Is it in the abstract form? Is it too scientific? Because if you're to go there, couldn't use carbon sink. She doesn't even understand. Look at our language. Looking at our language itself, I can say that it's not rich. Because
I don't know about that.
Okay, comparing it with other languages, talk of Swahili, but it's not that rich to the. It's quite difficult to actually, because most of even this program itself, we're speaking in English. So Shona itself or other languages, talk of Ndebele, we need the climate change message to be in those
in all languages.
Exactly. Because
was that addressed at COP26? Let's talk about some issues that were addressed. What can be done better in COP27 in terms of not just women, but making sure that our globe is protected and that the human existence might not, actually, like, die down in a million years of time because of atmosphere breakdown or whatsoever.
Again, like I said previously, there is no climate action without climate literacy, and there is no climate action without climate finance. So if I'm to go there, I still need money. If I need to empower women, if they still need to invest more on greener technology, there's need of money. So I feel like we need those funds. We need those to make sure that we do those green projects. There's need of funds. So women still need funding to make sure that they also make a green transition.
Indeed.
To achieve
back home. I do feel like loss and damage issues were not addressed at COP26. I feel like now that it's coming home, it's coming to Africa in Egypt. Let us address in COP27. Let us put key issues first. Loss and damage.
Let's put Africa first.
Africa
first.
We are the ones who are being affected with the cyclones, the floods. So let us address those loss and damage. What's going to happen? What's happening? They haven't gained their livelihoods back. Those people in Shmani. So let's first address those losses and damages that are affecting us as women and as people in the marginalized, as people in the global south, because the time is now. So let's pave way for COP27 by addressing loss and damage issues.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I think there is also a need on education, to educate journalists so that they can report with something which is better.
Yeah, that's quite
especially in understanding. You know, journalists, we don't know the technical terms, so we need to simplify it. How can we do that? So I think we need trainings.
Yes.
On how to
a layman.
Yes, so that a layman in the
street
can understand. And even those in marginalized communities, they have to understand that.
Right, thank you so much for that, ladies. Last question here. Maybe I'm going to bring this to Natalie because you already work in the renewable energy sector. We are obviously lacking more women in things to do with climate change. And right now, even women in the renewable energy sector, right, which is the future. How then can we educate women? Because we can talk so much about representing them. We can talk so much about, you know, what can be done. But if the women aren't actively involved, it makes no sense, you know. So how then can women be motivated into being involved in issues to do with climate change, because they obviously affect them at the end of the day?
Okay, so I say that women are the ones who cook most. They spend most of their time in the kitchen. So why not take advantage of the resources that they are using right now? I talked about firewood. Educate them that there are other ways of actually moving.
Green sources of
energy. Yeah. So why not even teach them about biogas? We have a lot of food waste out there.
But is that feasible though?
Exactly. That's what I'm asking. This is the Zimbabwean context. Is that not feasible?
So then we just have to stick with the total stuff, because for now that's what we have.
And these are issues that should be talked about in COP27, because it's not only Zimbabwe that's probably experiencing
and it still comes back to climate finance. Yeah, we need green technology. We need the green energy. It needs finance. Even look at the solar panels. They're quite expensive. How many people can afford?
Which is why I'm saying before we even get to the expenses, before we get to trying to create some green thing that can stop us from, you know, putting the ozone layer at risk, Rumbi, tell me, how then do we make women actively involved in issues to do with climate change? Because to be honest, it's not everyone that wants to watch a show about climate change, you know? It's not everyone that goes on Instagram and looks for a page that has to do with climate change. But it's affecting us, and one day we shall be wiped off Earth because of the climate, you know? Indeed. So maybe tell us, how then do we protect our ozone layer? How then do we protect our climate with being actively involved as women, young or old?
Okay, going back to what NESIA said, let's demystify climate change. Let them know what climate change is. Let them understand it. Then from there, using the indigenous knowledge systems, we build together, we work together, and then see what is most feasible for them. Because we might say that we want to give them a sort of stuff, but they know that they don't need it. Let's ask them, what do you need? This is what climate change is. This is how it's affecting you. How do you think that we should address this? Let us get the information from them, and then build innovative ideas from there. That's the only way that you can make, because you can't just go to a rural area, to a village, and then just say, I'm here with solar panels. They might reject it. So let's talk to them.
Because some of them are very conservative.
And I think we need to make something to do with money. Or maybe I can say to incentivize these initiatives. For example, when you say, let's use cook stoves, and you train about 5 people, and then you say, if you teach them how to make cook stoves, they have to pay you $5. And it will move faster, and they will adopt that system quickly. For example, I see in Mbire again, they are doing it for business, cook stoves, and almost every household, they are now using cook stoves. So I think it's something that needs to be.
Thank you so much, Nesi. Anyone else with something to say from what Nesi has said?
Okay, so there's an article that I actually read. It's a book, Climate Change in Zimbabwe. So you find that there's a certain organization that actually tried to push this initiative on social styles, but the issue was to do, how do people even really care about it? Like, so I think there's need to really educate them about why are you really using it? Because yes, you can give me the social stuff and then I can just put it there in my home and never use it. So I think they still need to really advertise the product, educate people. There is need of massive public awareness on climate change, especially to young women in the rural areas.
Okay, thank you so much, ladies. We are kind of running out of time, but our conversation really maneuvers around COP27. As we get, you know, we're in the road to COP27. So much is happening already, but what do you think can be done better in, you know, this year's COP27, which is going to be in Egypt in November? What can be done better? What are key issues that not only affect women, but that can change the aspect of climate change in Africa? Maybe starting with NESIA, Natalie, and lastly, Rumbi.
I think what we need as Africans is ways to empower ourselves so that we can create our own climate finances.
Right.
Because like now we are mainly relying more on Western backed, like UN what?
Funds, you're relying on foreign funds.
Yes, that's what I want to say.
But
I think that's okay. You can talk.
Instead of just focusing more on the Eastern or European funds that come into Africa, we have to also try to rely on us.
But why should we do that? Why should we? Those nations are already developed. Their economies are already strong. They already have measures.
But we need just a bit.
No, they
that we say no. We have our African bank, which mainly focus on climate. Look at what Cyclone Idai did, and they came in much later to help us.
Because
but we were suffering
now,
already.
there are no clear commitments that were going to give you the 100 billion that you agreed on.
And they will give us when they want to.
We should
not at our own time.
COP27. They should give us that 100 billion because we need it now.
And it's said to should be doubled because it's
how can we be sure that this 100 billion is going to go to issues to do with climate change? Because already it's no secret that you know, corruption is like an epidemic in Africa. So that money could just go missing.
That's one of the challenges.
And they don't have confidence.
Exactly.
I think that strikes the conversation that what should be done to make sure that there is no misdirection of funds, to make sure that funds that are directed for climate change really go there. There should be some sort of governing body that should maybe address climate funds.
Accountability and transparency is needed.
Okay, thank you so much for that point there, Nancy. Maybe Natalie, tell us, what do you think can be done better, and what do you think should be redressed in the Zimbabwean context in terms of climate change in COP27?
Okay, so I like the topic today, though. I think one of the things that have to be focused on, let's talk of gender responsive measures that just have to focus with women. If it is about funding women projects, let it be. If it is about women or men, because we differently get affected by climate change, like in a different way. And there should be strategies on fighting against climate change. As a woman, there should be specific strategies and ways to do it better. So I think we should come up with new, innovative, gender responsive measures for women, for each gender. Even talk of people with disability, young men, young women, the children themselves, and even the elderly.
All right, thank you so much for that point there, Natalie. And lastly, Rumbi, what do you think can be done better, and what other pointers can be redressed at COP27, which will be in Egypt and in November?
Okay, in the Zimbabwean context, I'll still hold the government and hold all parties involved that we don't want to be represented as youth and as young women. Why should they make decisions for our future? And we should be able to be given the platform to make our own decisions. So I say that we need more representation of youth, more representation of women, more representation of the marginalized to be addressed firstly. So that,
and especially those who are already affected by climate change.
Yes. So that we can be able to make maybe better solutions for COP27, because now we'll be having the people that are directly affected by that. So let's put youth first, because the youth are the ones that have discovered their future. Climate action now, and as youth, this is our time now. So give us the chance, give us a seat at the table.
Wow, I think Rumbi should have just given us our conclusion. Thank you so much to our viewers. We were discussing climate change, and this is an issue that affects everyone and anyone. May we be those people that work on to trying to make sure that our climate stays in balance, and that the future can be saved for future generations. Thank you so much for joining us. We wouldn't be here without you. See you next time.